The legal wrangling begins in Detroit's bankruptcy a week after the filing, plus the latest education battles in Lansing, Common Core, teacher evaluations, and school districts out of money. It's all coming up right now on MiWeek.
Michigan's turnaround is being powered by things we do better than anywhere else in the world. Today's global leaders routinely turn to Michigan to work on their most difficult problems. That's because the engineering talent in this part of the world is simply the best. So many possibilities lie ahead for Michigan's future. These opportunities are here and starting to happen. The vision for the new Michigan. Share it, talk it up, drive it home. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Good evening. Happy to have you with us. I'm Christy McDonald. The kids are out of school on summer break, but what will happen inside those classrooms this fall seems to be a top priority in Lansing right now. Tonight, we'll take a look at the debate over Common Core standards, plus new teacher evaluations coming up in just a bit. But we are going to start with Detroit, a week after filing for bankruptcy. The judge ruled on Wednesday that the federal court, not state courts, will decide if Detroit's eligible to enter into bankruptcy, and any legal questions surrounding the protection of pensions will be decided in that court. It has been an interesting week with national reaction to Detroit's plight, and there are lots of questions about what happens next. Let's get started tonight here in our Midtown studios with our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's always good to see you on MiWeek.
Good to be here.
All right, so let's launch into what do you think of the national reaction to Detroit's bankruptcy? How have you watched the news in other places, and what have you thought?
Well, we've been tracking it. We've been running actually a lot of the out-of-state, out-of-town commentary in the Detroit News, and it's fairly predictable. I mean, they're focusing in on all the bad statistics that we know by heart. The 80,000 abandoned buildings, the 700,000 population, the crime rate, and all of that, and it's getting. Those statistics are getting pounded in the heads of an American audience. It's going to be hard for us to change that story as we proceed through this bankruptcy here.
Are they getting the story right, or are they just kind of grabbing the low-hanging fruit?
Well, I mean, it's like the people who come here and parachute in for a weekend and write a big story about Detroit. I mean, you get the same kind of perpetuation of the negative stereotypes out of that kind of reporting too. I've been a little more struck, I think, by the reaction in the financial press, which has had an equal sort of awe at the numbers that are involved here, the numbers of the creditor debt, the pension issue. That's getting a ton of attention, and people are watching it because I think everyone thinks this will set some sort of precedent that will have an effect in other places.
So do you think we're going to see reporters that are going to start to camp out here in Detroit for the next year and a half or so?
I don't know. I think they'll be in and out because the bankruptcy process isn't that neat and clean. I mean, this will drag out. There'll be a hearing here, a hearing there. There'll be a lot of negotiations going on that won't be inside the courtroom. So I think we'll get visitors. I doubt we'll get campers.
Anyone staying for the long haul. All right, so let's talk about what happened in court this week. Why was it a victory for Kevin Orr?
Well, I mean, I think the whole point of filing for bankruptcy was to deal with one judge in one courtroom on all of these different issues. And the fear, in fact, was that you'd have lots of people filing in all kinds of different jurisdictions. And that's exactly what the unions did. They filed in state court because they figured that was the place they'd get the most sympathetic hearing. By consolidating all this in one court and saying we're going to deal with all of the issues, the federal issues and the state issues here, it just makes it easier for the city to make its case and not have to do it over and over again with judges who could be all over the map.
Yeah, it takes Robert Davis and the activist judges of the Ingham County Circuit Court out of this process. It gives the hope that it'll be a quicker process because they were slowing things down at every turn with these lawsuits and these injunctions that the Court of Appeals would have to throw out. It gives us some hope that we'll get this thing done on a reasonable timetable.
Okay, so we keep saying we're going to need to get this done and it's going to have to happen quickly. What's the process now for the next couple of weeks?
Well, I mean, I think pretty quickly Kevin Orr is going to ask the court to start docketing some of these issues some of the bigger issues that we got to deal with. The pension issue, they've got to get retirees represented in the court, decide who's going to speak for them, not just on the pension issue, but on the health care issue, the creditor issue in terms of who's secured, who's not. They're going to push really hard to get all that stuff settled early so that it puts pressure on the creditors and the pensions to settle. I mean, you still could end up with them acquiescing to Kevin's plan, which will be the blueprint for the bankruptcy anyway. And so I expect that by mid-fall, a lot of these issues could be very close to some sort of resolution.
I think the institutional investors, the banks and bondholders, will come to reality fairly quickly in the process, I hope. I think it's going to be difficult for the pensioners to come to that same sort of acceptance of the Kevin Orr offer. It's a very, very drastic offer in terms of the sacrifice it requires of retirees, and they can't just go in and voluntarily say, okay, we're going to do this. That's where the sticking point's going to be, and that's where it's going to drag out.
All right, so over the last week, people have been talking about bailout. What about a bailout for Detroit? And I think Republican senators right now are working on adding to a transportation bill that no municipality will get any kind of federal money to help them in a
how
crisis.
is a bankrupt federal government going to bail out a bankrupt city? I mean, there's no money anywhere to help Detroit. And I think the governor and Kevin Orr said that very clearly last week. They said, we've got to get out of this ourselves. Nobody's going to ride in here with a big pile of money and dump it on Detroit. It's just not going to happen.
Do you expect some support, though, from the Obama administration in terms of funding?
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about a bailout because we're in bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy will restructure our debt in a way that will allow the city to function. But on the back end of that, we're going to require a lot of investment. The federal government and the state government helped us get into this problem through their systematic disinvestment over 60 years. I don't see why they shouldn't be part of trying to figure out what the future of Detroit can be and helping to build
because
it.
Because then you start a line going hundreds deep of municipalities wanting the same thing from the federal government.
Who else is in this kind of shape?
And the federal, Chicago's headed toward it, Steve. A lot of communities, a lot of cities, even in Michigan, are headed this way. What the governor said about help for Detroit is it would consider it on a project-by-project basis. I assume the federal government will do the same thing. Maybe. On a project-by-project basis. They'll do grants here. But you have to remember, Detroit got a lot of federal money that it squandered, that it sent back, that it didn't use right. You're sitting down there in Washington, you're thinking, oh gosh, let's give them some more. I mean, we haven't spent the money the federal government has given us so far.
What money are you talking about?
Well, we send back home demolition money.
We actually don't send back demolition money.
We've sent back blight money. We've got our housing HUD money. We've got 72 programs, federal grant programs, and nearly every one of them are out of compliance, according to Kevin Orr's report. I mean, we're not doing well with the money we're getting.
So do you think that's the reason why that Washington maybe is taking a wait-and-see attitude with this?
I think there's no question they're going to take a wait-and-see attitude. What they want to see is that the city get its house in order, and that's what the bankruptcy process and the emergency management process is doing. On the back end of that, again, you still are going to need money. You need money for job creation. You need money to get these abandoned homes down. You need money to start building a school district that people will actually be attracted to. These are things that the federal government does in other places that have hit rock bottom, either through some sort of disaster. In New Orleans, think of all the money that's been spent in New Orleans to try to help rebuild that community. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of the federal government's role. I don't think we're wrong for expecting it.
The federal government just sent $100 million in for
demolition. That's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like they're ignoring it. That if that's spent right, that could do 10, 20,000 houses.
Sure.
That would make a big difference, but that's always the question here. Is the money going to be spent appropriately?
All right, so we're a week into this. Have you seen or have you heard anyone talking about the perception of the city changing? Businesses saying, well, we were thinking about investing in Detroit, but now we're going to wait for a while. Have you heard anything like that?
Dan Gilbert this week slapped on the table a plan for a $500 million development on the site of the new county jail. I mean, I don't think Dan
Gilbert aside, because it feels like Dan Gilbert buys no matter what the atmosphere is.
And that triggers other buying. I don't think it's going to hurt private investment in Detroit because that is mostly coming internally anyway from this area, from local folks, and I think that'll continue.
What about you?
Yeah, no, I think that's the tale of two cities aspect of this, right? The government dysfunction has not really impinged on the private enthusiasm for investment in Detroit. We need more of it. Dan Gilbert needs partners. He needs competitors. That's a really important aspect of this. You can't let one person monopolize, I think, the whole thing for too long. But we're moving in the right direction there, and I don't think that's going to stop just because it didn't stop when we were 33 times in the hole and the city was on the brink of bankruptcy. I think the bankruptcy is a positive step in that way, saying maybe these investors will get a stable government partner for some of the things that are going on.
We are just about a week away from the primary election. What are the mayoral candidates saying about bankruptcy?
Well, I mean, almost to a candidate across this field, they're saying, well, we didn't need to go into bankruptcy. We could have done other things, and I'll guarantee you, if any one of them had been in City Hall, this city would still be in bankruptcy. They're all saying we didn't need the emergency manager. It's still pandering to voters who, even though this I believe there's strong support in the city for this course, the politicians feel there are certain things they have to say, and they keep saying them.
Is that the number one platform? Is that people are running against the fact that there's bankruptcy and emergency manager?
I don't think people are running against bankruptcy. They are running for the idea that Detroit ought to get democratic control back, and that ought to happen quickly rather than over a longer period of time. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. All of the candidates who second guess the bankruptcy, if you ask them, if you press on that issue, what would you have done to avoid it? None of them has an answer. The political process was part of the problem here, and that's unfortunate. You did, I think, need to move that out of the way and bring in somebody like Kevin Orr, who has a lot more decision-making power to get us through this period.
And the truth is, not much of a campaign anyway. These candidates have been having trouble, particularly in the council races, raising money. It's been so far the election has been a real disappointment. People are distracted by other things.